Italtile has warned that its profit is likely to fall in its current financial year. That's as weak economic growth and tough trading conditions persist. The impact of this is evident in the tile manufacturer's sales update for the 5 months to end November. During the period, the owner of the CTM brand reported a 2.9% year-on-year decline in turnover. Consumer confidence remained subdued in this period as the construction and building sector was hurt by economic challenges, including little growth, high inflation, rising living costs and elevated interest rates, which drove up building costs, resulting in fewer new projects or renovations. The government's lack of urgency in dealing with the water and energy crises is becoming more and more frustrating. That's according to Astral's chair, Dian Zilof. He states in the company's annual report that bird flu, power interruptions and water shortages have devastated the poultry industry and believes not enough is being done by government despite numerous promises of action. Unions have called on the business rescue practitioners for the SA Post Office to consider other avenues instead of retrenching thousands of employees. The organizations say layoffs are not the right approach. This after a majority of creditors voted last week in favor of the business rescue plan, which includes reducing the branch network and retrenching about 6,000 employees. While unions have welcomed the turnaround plan, they are against the retrenchment of workers, as that would add to the already high unemployment rate in South Africa. The official unemployment rate stood at 32% in the third quarter. Retailer confidence edged up in the fourth quarter. The Bureau for Economic Research's latest survey increased to 47 points from a 3-year low of 20. That's as lower levels of load shedding and increased solar power use reduced the need to run diesel generators and boosted profitability. The BR's Deputy Director Craig Lambeau says the improvement suggests retailers were more satisfied with prevailing business conditions in the fourth quarter. And tensions in South America have been rising, causing concern across the globe. Here's our reporter Darling Lachela with more.
That's right, Zinati. The conflict between Venezuela and neighboring Guyana is intensifying, and many global leaders have warned of a war in the region. Joining me now with further insight is Deutsche Welle's Lars Halter. Thanks for your time today. Now, Lars, you've been following developments in South America, which are actually carefully followed by leaders in Europe as well as the rest of the world. Now, what's the latest in the conflict?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, after a tense few days, I think there is at least some good news. Venezuela and Guyana have agreed to a high-level meeting to be held later this week. It is to discuss the status of the disputed Essequibo region. Now, let me give you some background here. Guyana, of course, is Venezuela's neighbor to the east, and Guyana is split lengthwise by the Essequibo River. About a third of the country is to the east of the river, and about 2/3 are to the west. That part is also the Essequibo region, and even though that land has been part of Guyana ever since 1899, Venezuela claims it actually belongs within its borders, and it has threatened to annex it. There's one reason for all that: huge oil reserves that have been found there. Now, Venezuela did have that region. It then went to Guyana under British colonial rule, so there is a lot of history there, and it's pretty complicated. But as it stands for more than a century now, Essequibo has been part of Guyana. It's internationally accepted that way, and no one expects the International Court of Justice in The Hague to rule otherwise. They are actually looking into it right now. In the meantime, at least we're not expecting a military offensive for now. As I said, there will be a meeting later this week. It will bring together representatives from both countries, as well as Brazilian President Lula da Silva and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Now, why is Guyana suddenly such an important player in the oil business?
So mostly, of course, because of the immense oil reserves discovered there. That was back in 2015. And it's not just any kind of oil. It's light, sweet crude. It has very low levels of sulfur. It's very easy to refine. It's pretty much the best crude out there. Very lucrative. ExxonMobil is already involved in getting it out of the ground. But of course, everyone wants a piece of the pie. And especially Venezuela. That country's president, Nicolas Maduro, said he wants to annex the region and start drilling. And that's where we are now, with that threat hanging in the air. A dispute like this, of course, brings in all kinds of partners, and now this has really blown up. Guyana is supported by the US and also by the EU, but Venezuela, clearly on the wrong side of the issue by any international legal standards, also has its supporters, Russia and China chief among them. Russia, that also annexed Crimea almost 10 years ago in a similar dispute, has very close ties to Venezuela, including trade, and that at a time when almost no one else is trading with Russia. China, on the other hand, is Venezuela's biggest creditor and most certainly has an interest for the country doing well. So what we are seeing in South America is not just a regional conflict there, but it actually pits the world's superpowers against each other as well.
And Lars, before I let you go, what does this all mean for the fight against climate change?
Yeah, getting that oil out of the ground would very obviously be a disaster. And there's some irony in the timeline here too. The Essequibo reserves were discovered in 2015, shortly before 200 countries signed the Paris Climate Accord and promised to work towards phasing out fossil fuels. Now, some progress has been made, of course, towards that goal, but drilling for the oil we're talking about here would be a new giant push in the other direction. It would likely mean that the global community would fail to reach its goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Many experts think we're not even going to 2 but to 2.5 degrees, so there is quite a bit at stake here. Bad news here, even as we're awaiting that meeting that's coming up later this week that I mentioned, nothing discussed there will likely help the climate, because this meeting is not about whether to get all the crude out of the ground, but simply about who is doing it and who stands to profit the most.
We'll be watching out for those talks later this week. Thanks for that update. That was Lars Halter from Deutsche Welle.